Edward said, a voice between worlds. Let's imagine a boy named Edward living in a city full of history, Jerusalem, in 1935. Edward's family is Palestinian and Christian. Sometimes he lives in Jerusalem, sometimes in Cairo, and later, he moves all the way to the United States. He grows up seeing both Arab and Western ways of life, which gives him a special outlook on the world. As Edward grows, he loves reading stories and learning languages. He notices that people from the West, places like Europe and America, often have strange ideas about the East, places like the Arab world, India, and China. They call it the Orient. Edward finds that lots of books, movies, and even scholars talk about the Orient as if it is mysterious, different, and not quite as smart as the West. Edward becomes a professor at a big school called Columbia University in New York City. He decides to write about what he has observed. In 1978, he writes a famous book called Orientalism. In this book, Edward explains how, for many years, Western writers and scholars have described Eastern peoples in stereotyped, often unkind, and even false ways. He asks people to think, are these stories true? Or are they just making the West feel wiser and better? This book changes the way many people think. Edward's big idea is that when the West tells stories about the East that are not true or are only partly true, it helps Western countries control and rule over these places. Edward's work starts a new field called postcolonial studies, where people look more closely at how history, stories, and power connect. But Edward doesn't just study books, he cares deeply about real people and real places. He writes many other books. For example, in The Question of Palestine, he talks about his homeland and the struggles of the Palestinian people. He also writes covering Islam, looking at how newspapers and television in the West often give the wrong idea about Islam and Muslims. Edward loves many things. He writes about music and about how writers and critics, people who study and explain books, can help change the world. In his book Out of Place, he shares memories of his childhood and growing up in many lands, always thinking about where he belongs. Edward said becomes not just a teacher, but a voice for people who are not always heard. He helps others notice when stories are unfair or when one group is making decisions about another without really knowing them. He stands up for Palestinians and all people whose voices are sometimes ignored. Edward Said dies in 2003, but his ideas live on. Today, if you read a story or hear news about a different country, you might stop and think, is this the real story, or does it just show one side? Thanks to Edward, more people ask these important questions and try to understand our big, mixed-up world a little better. And so, Edward Said is remembered as a bridge between worlds, one who helped many people see each other in new ways.